The history of the marathon is fascinating to me. Legend has it that in 490 BC, the Greek messenger Pheidippides ran over 40 kilometers or 25 miles to deliver the message that Greece had defeated the invading Persian army. Pheidippides didn't stop once on his journey. He even discarded his clothes and his weapons so he would have nothing weighing him down. Finally, he burst into an assembly in Athens, naked, dehydrated, and exhausted, crying out simply, "We have won!" before collapsing dead on the floor. The marathon represents both athletic fortitude and the strength of the human will. It has always been a staple of the Olympics to honor the legend and the history of Greece. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about the worst marathon in the entire history of the Olympics. Y'all already know who I am. Hello, I am Julia from the future. You will be seeing me periodically throughout this video because, as usual, I did not get all the footage I needed the first time I recorded. In our modern times, the Olympics are, to put it simply, a pretty big deal. The international multi-sport event takes place once every 4 years, alternating between summer and winter. It's considered to be the ultimate test of athleticism. Only the best of the best from each country can qualify to compete at the Olympics. And once you're there, you're competing against the absolute best athletes from around the world. More than just a test of athleticism, the Olympics stands as a powerful symbol of unity and sportsmanship. I swear, no matter how many Olympics I live to see, I always get choked up watching athletes from other countries encouraging each other and supporting each other and cheering each other on. Like watching these athletes give each other the thumbs up because they don't speak the same language, but they still want to congratulate each other. It's like, I'm a sucker for it every single time. It doesn't matter your history. It doesn't matter what war crimes your countries may have committed against each other. The only thing that matters here is if you can fucking ball. The Olympics as we know them today are a very polished, prestigious, established event with very high standards. But they weren't always like that. It's kind of hard for me to imagine, but there was a time when the modern Olympic Games, as we know them, were a very new thing. And they were still, like, ironing out the kinks and figuring things out. Well, today, kids, we are going to be talking about the Olympic Games of 1904, a time when they absolutely did not have their kinks ironed out.
They walk, they talk, they shimmy to the music they...
Let's set the scene. Here we are in the great year of 1904. Speaking of the year 1904, before we get into the actual history element of it, I feel the need to give a slight trigger warning for racism. I'm gonna try to keep it as tasteful and toned down as I can, but the fact of the matter is our story takes place in 1904 in the United States of America. Things were very racist. So yeah, here we are, 1904. It's a big deal because the United States has been chosen to host the third Olympiad, the third ever modern Olympics. And everyone is just pumped. And the city given the honor of hosting the Olympic Games is Chicago, Illinois. Now I can hear you saying, wait a second, Julia. I just Googled it, and it says the 1904 Olympics weren't in Chicago. They were in St. Louis, Missouri. Are you, like, stupid or something? Okay, first of all, be nice to me, please. And second, originally the Olympics were supposed to be hosted in Chicago, Illinois. But the Olympic Committee was faced with one wacky little problem, and that was the World's Fair. The World's Fair is another international event where countries from around the world can show off their achievements and inventions in exhibits or stands or shows, and it's just a great time. A lot of great inventions throughout history that we use all the time today were first introduced at World Fairs throughout history. Famously, Walt Disney first showed the world his legendary invention, audio animatronics, at the World's Fair. This technology of audio animatronics are now used in theme parks around the world. My point is, the World's Fair was nothing to sneeze at. And it just so happened that the World's Fair was scheduled to happen in the same country around the same time as the Olympics. Except instead of in Chicago, they were going to be in St. Louis, Missouri. Organizers of the World's Fair thought this was a problem. They didn't want another international event to be happening at the same time in a different city. They argued it was a bad idea to force people to choose between seeing the World's Fair or the Olympics because they were in different cities, and that both of them would lose out on ticket sales. Instead, they proposed a solution. Ow, fuck. They proposed that the Olympics should be moved from Chicago to St. Louis, Missouri. If they're in the same area, people who had already bought tickets to either the World's Fair or the Olympics are more likely to buy tickets for the other event as well, because, you know, I'm already in the neighborhood. The World's Fair even graciously offered to collaborate with the Olympic Committee and hold promotional events, encouraging attendance to see the Olympics as well. Double the tickets, double the publicity, everyone wins, right? Wrong. This is so weird to me because in my entire memory, in my entire life, the Olympics has always been this like big established thing that everyone cherishes and respects. It's so crazy to me that there was once a time when the Olympic Games were so new that they could just be told to move. You could tell them, pack your shit up and go to St. Louis, Missouri. And they just did it. Thus began possibly the worst collab in history. Between the two events, the Olympics got the short end of the stick almost every fucking time. First, and most obviously, they had to scrap and redo all of their plans. Everything they had already set up in Chicago had to be thrown away and they had to do it all over again in St. Louis. This includes advertising, housing, and getting the locations for all the events to take place. Oh, and speaking of locations and all that precious real estate, the World's Fair already had all of their locations of where things would be happening planned and booked long in advance. Like, they were set. They had everything they needed. And by they were set, I mean they got all the good locations before the Olympics had a chance. The Olympics, coming in late, basically had to work around the fair and take whatever real estate was left. This meant that a lot of the actual events were conducted in less than ideal conditions. More on that later. And as far as attendance and publicity goes, there was just no possible way the Olympics was actually going to compete with the World's Fair. The Olympics lasted from July 1st to November 23rd. 5 months. Damn! The World's Fair lasted from April 30th to December 1st. Over 8 months. Damn! The World's Fair was going to get more ticket sales and more publicity by default because their event was lasting so much longer. Also, they were more established, they had been around for so much longer than the Olympics had, and to way oversimplify it, the World's Fair was really, really fun. But wait, I hear you say, didn't you say that the World's Fair was offering to do free publicity and advertising for the Olympics? Didn't that help Olympic attendance at all? We need to talk about Anthropology days. Hi, me again. So remember earlier in the video when I said minor trigger warning for racism? Well, this is about to be the part of the video where the racism is discussed, and it's actually not that minor at all. Bruh. If you aren't comfortable hearing about some pretty horrifying and degrading human rights violations, then please skip to this point in the video. Again, I'm not going to go into too much detail or sensationalize it or anything, but it's still very upsetting to hear about. Like I said, the World's Fair is a series of exhibits showcasing things from around the world, accomplishments from different countries, inventions, people, culture, all that good stuff. But this was 1904, and so one of these exhibits showcasing culture from around the world that was done in collaboration for publicity for the Olympics was the Human Zoo. Yes, it is exactly what you think it is. Yes, it is as bad as it sounds. For the record, the Human Zoo in the 1904 World's Fair was not the first nor the last human zoo exhibit. Hell, it wasn't even the first human zoo exhibit to be in the World's Fair. Over 1,000 people of color from countries around the world were brought in to be part of the Anthropology Days exhibit. They were brought in to basically sit in enclosures that were designed to replicate their natural habitat so that they could be gawked at by fairgoers. But wait, there's more! Because remember, this is supposed to be somehow tied to the Olympics, right? That's where the actual events of Anthropology Days comes in. The Anthropology Days events were basically designed to combine the anthropological elements of the World's Fair with the athletic elements of the Olympics by making members of the Human Zoo participate and compete against each other in varying sports. Yes, that is the collab with the Olympics. The Anthropology Days events were advertised as, quote, athletic events for savages. These contests included shot put, running, weightlifting, tug of war, pole climbing, and broad jumping. And yes, the Olympic Committee knew that this was what the promotion was going to be. They collaborated and helped organize it. So was this collaboration successful? Did it raise awareness and get people excited for the Olympics? Not really. I know all of this might seem completely unrelated to the Olympic marathon, but I think that the events of Anthropology Days and the human zoo itself are really important for giving context to our ruinous race. I think it's also important to just acknowledge that this happened, you know? That like the human zoo was a thing. These were real people in the exhibits. These were real people in the audience. You guys know I love learning about the wacky, weird, funny parts of history, but as a quote-unquote educator, I think it's also important that we learn about the parts of history that aren't wacky and funny. I found some sources that claimed that the people in these exhibits or participating in these games were being paid for it, like it was a job that they were actually being compensated for. But that doesn't make me feel a lot better for a few reasons. Like, for one thing, even if some of the people in the human zoo were being paid to be there, we know for a fact that a lot of them weren't being paid or compensated in any way. In fact, a lot of them didn't have the ability to refuse participation. A good amount of the people in these human zoo exhibits were fucking children, and so by default, they couldn't consent to this kind of thing. They specifically went out of their way to really showcase Native American children who were in American boarding schools. For those of you who don't know, America has a long history of separating indigenous children from their families and forcing them into boarding schools. And the point of these boarding schools was to civilize them, aka stripping them of their beliefs, traditions, culture, and language. Well, the United States was actually really proud of these boarding schools, and they really wanted to show off how successful they had been at civilizing or assimilating these native children into proper American culture. So the sports teams of multiple of these boarding schools performed or competed in Anthropology Days events. There is no way that these Native American children could consent to being put on display like this, considering they couldn't even consent to leave the boarding schools they were in. And there is no way that they were paid or compensated for their labor. I couldn't find any exact numbers on like how many of the people in the exhibits were paid or what they were paid, whatever. But even for the percentage of these people who were being paid, they did this voluntarily, they knew what they were getting into, they were fully compensated for their time and labor. That doesn't really make it any less degrading and horrifying, right? Oh, speaking of degrading and horrifying.
Break it up, bump it down, side swipe, suicide.
The one problem that faced the 1904 Olympics actually wasn't the Olympic Committee's fault. It was completely outside of their control. The Olympics just happened to be happening right smack dab in the middle of the Russo-Japanese War. Countries involved in this war, understandably, weren't too keen on the idea of being stuck in the same place as their enemies, so they all just simply didn't send any athletes to compete at all. To put it simply, when you're hosting an enormous sporting event like this, the more athletes, the more competition, the better the show, right? I mean, the whole point of the Olympics is that there's athletes from countries all around the world participating. If we lose all the athletes from Russia, Japan, and Korea, that takes a huge bite out of our talent pool. I think this war is hurting me more than anyone else, you know? And our talent pool of athletes was about to get even smaller for a stupider reason. Apparently, just traveling to St. Louis, Missouri was really difficult. This sounds so stupid, like it must be fake. I hypothesized that all the other countries could just tell from a mile away what a complete shit show this was turning out to be, and so they were just like, oh, I'd love to, but traveling to St. Louis specifically is... I just can't do it. I can't do it. Sorry, bud. In the end, only 12 to 15 countries participated in the 1904 games. Wait a second. That's pissing me off. What do you mean 12 to 15? Like, were they there or not? 13 countries there.
Disputed.
It's like dubious as to if Italy or Newfoundland were there. Some sources also list athletes from the following nations as having competed in these games. Well, what do you mean? Were they there or not? So yeah, officially 13 nations participated in the 1904 Olympics. In total, there was a whopping 651 athletes. Oh my god! To put things into perspective, the very next Summer Olympics after this one, held in Stockholm, Sweden, had a total of 2,408 athletes. My god! Oh, and did I mention that of the 651 athletes participating, 526 of them were from the United States? Golly, I wonder if someone here has some slight advantage.
I'm totally naked.
The big day finally arrives. August 30th, 1904. It's been a rough journey. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. It's been a rough year. But maybe this can be the turning point and we can turn this whole Olympics shit around. One small problem? We have no runners. Bruh. We have 0 runners. Just kidding, we have like 30 something runners, 32 I think. But still, it'd be a lot better if there were more fucking runners. Did I say one small problem? I meant a lot of very large problems. We have so many, so big problems. Continuing with our existing theme of the Olympics not being able to get any good real estate for their games, they decided for some ungodly reason that the marathon should be run on unpaved country roads in St. Louis, Missouri. So, where is the marathon going to be happening? What roads are we gonna be running on? For some fucking reason, the race was going to begin with the runners doing 5 laps on like a stadium track, and then they'd move outside and do the rest of the race on the roads. So, like, why wasn't the whole race done on the track? I don't know. I don't fucking know anymore. Let's do a really quick rapid fire speed run of all the other problems facing the marathon before the marathon had even started. 1. It was August in Missouri, aka it was hot as fuck. Reports state that it was 90 degrees and humid at the starting point of the race. 2. The race began at 3 in the afternoon. Why? I don't know. Marathons typically begin very early in the morning to take advantage of cooler weather, but not our boys. Most of the outside portion of the race took place on unpaved country roads. And that means one thing: dust. As you will soon learn, dust was probably the most deadly part of this entire marathon. The course also took runners over a bunch of hills of various steepness, because I know when I'm participating in one of the most challenging races in human history, I'm really hoping for some extra resistance, you know? This isn't as much a problem as it is just an interesting fact about the race itself. The 1904 Olympic Marathon was 24 miles instead of the usual 26. Because this was before the length of a marathon had been standardized. So the more you know. One of the Olympic officials, James Edward Sullivan, was an actual evil mad scientist. His contribution to the marathon event pretty much was just making sure that people didn't have water to drink. He deliberately set it up so that there would be only one point in the race where the runners could access fresh water to drink around the 12-mile mark or halfway point. Why the fuck would he do something like this? Apparently, he was using the marathon as an opportunity to conduct research and test the limits of purposeful dehydration. Nowadays, we understand that drinking water and staying hydrated is important, but back in the day, this wasn't common knowledge. And so it was actually a pretty hot topic in the science community, trying to figure out, like, well, does drinking water actually help you? Does water make you healthier? You know? James Edward Sullivan decided the perfect way to get to the bottom of this mystery was to test it out on people running 24 miles in 90-degree weather. I can hear you saying, wow, that sounds really unethical. Well, guess what? James was also one of the collaborators of the Anthropology Days exhibit of the World Fair. That's right, he is one of the brilliant minds behind the fucking human zoo games. Additionally, none of these dusty, unpaved country roads were, like, blocked off for the runners or even cleared of obstacles in any way. In fact, a lot of these roads were still in use by the general public while the race was happening. So throughout the race, the runners had to regularly dodge cars, trains, trolley cars, and pedestrians. Not to mention just any shit or litter that was on the street, because the Olympics didn't clear that off. And did I mention that things were dusty? Because they were very, very dusty. So naturally, Olympic officials had to be present while the race was happening to make sure that everything was up to their very high standards. So the whole time the race was going on, Olympic officials would be driving alongside the runners in automobiles. Did I say driving alongside the runners? Oh, I meant driving right in front of and behind the runners, meaning that these cars were constantly kicking up even more dust for the athletes to breathe in. So now that we know the conditions of the race, let's meet the people who are going to be running in these conditions. Let's meet our runners! Like, I'm not gonna go through all the runners. Yeah, I can't go through all 32. So, here are the runners that I have something to say about. We got Frederick Loris, a long-distance American runner who, kind of looks like H.P. Lovecraft, unfortunately. Thomas Hicks, another American track and field runner. Felix Carvajal, he was a mailman representing Cuba. Representing South Africa, we have Len Taunyani and Jan Mashiani. These two were the first Africans to participate in the modern Olympics. Unfortunately, they weren't originally in St. Louis for the Olympics. The reason they were in town is because they were part of the exhibits at the World's Fair. But I want to make one thing very clear, okay? I found a lot of sources that imply that Len and Jan were not athletes, that they were just like two random bozos that were at the World's Fair, and so they're like, okay, I'll be in the marathon. That is not true. Both of these men were experienced long-distance runners. In fact, both of them had been message runners in the recent Boer War. So as everyone's lining up, about to start the race, that's when Felix arrives. It turns out he had most of his adventure before the race began. He was almost late to the race because he was too busy gambling and losing all his money in New Orleans. He managed to hitchhike over to St. Louis. Felix managed to get to the race right as it was about to start. One small problem: he didn't have any running clothes. Reports say that he was in street shoes, long trousers, a long sleeve shirt, and a beret. Not the ideal outfit for running in, but very cunty nonetheless. To try to be more aerodynamic, Felix ended up cutting his trousers to be more like shorts. He finished this just in time to get to the starting line. Oh, and one last thing about Felix. At the very beginning point of the race, he had not eaten for 40 hours. Just keep that in mind. That's gonna be relevant later. All right, guys. No more fucking around. It's racing time. On your mark, get set, go.
They're totally nude.
Our race begins and immediately the dust is causing problems. The dust from the road was plaguing these runners. It was getting in their eyes, nose, and mouth, coating their throats and making breathing extremely painful. Whew, boy, I bet they could sure use a swig of water right now. Oh wait, I don't think it's possible to overstate how fucking dusty these roads were and how much of a problem that dust was causing. In no time at all, the runners were dropping like flies. They were coughing, choking, and outright quitting the race. I will say, spoiler warning, there were no fatalities in this race. I promise you no one dies, but a few people almost did. And okay, let's give the Olympic Committee some credit. They had a number of physicians constantly monitoring the race to make sure that they could step in and help if anyone was actually in trouble. It just so happened that these physicians were being driven on the road in front of the runners in the cars that were kicking up more dust at the runners. Speaking of health problems, our boy Felix was really starting to struggle. The heat and the not eating for 40 hours was really catching up with him. At one point while running, he saw a person in a car on the side of the road with a bag of peaches, and he went over to the person, and this is my best interpretation of how this interaction went down. Yummy peaches. Excuse me, ma'am. Excuse me, ma'am. I'm so sorry to bother you, but I can't breathe. I have so much dust in my throat. I'm currently participating in the Olympic marathon. I haven't eaten in 40 hours, and my throat is so dry I can't breathe. Look, can I please have some of your peaches, please? I really need them. No. What? Sorry. So he stole their peaches, and he proceeded to eat them while continuing to run in the race. I like how this one article describes it as he playfully snatched the fruits and then ate them while running. Bro, I don't think Felix was in a very playful mood while this was going down, okay? So yeah, he ate the peaches, he ran a bit further, he saw an apple orchard, he stopped to eat some of the apples, he discovered that the apples were rotten, he got his stomach ache so bad he had to stop, and then he laid down and took a nap. A little less than halfway through the race, Thomas Hicks tried repeatedly to lay down and just give up, but his support crew wouldn't let him. They repeatedly forced him back onto the track.
Get your fucking ass up and work. It seems like nobody wants to work these days.
At roughly the 9-mile mark, Frederick Lores was suffering from cramps so bad he just decided he could not go on. He waved down the next Olympic official car that drove past him, and he hopped on board and rode into the sunset. What a legend. While all of this shenanigans was going on, our boy from South Africa, Len Tauniani, was apparently doing great. He probably would have been doing a lot better if he wasn't chased off the track by wild dogs. He got attacked by wild dogs. What the fuck is this, a crossover episode? This is like the perfect microcosm for all of the failings of the Olympic Committee in 1904. Len was a skilled long-distance runner. He was actually really fucking good at this. I found multiple reports saying that spectators believed he could have even won the whole race if he hadn't been chased off the track for over a mile by wild dogs. He could have very well been the winner of the entire race. But we forgot to put up a fence around the track, so that didn't happen, sorry. About 8 miles from the finish line, Thomas Hicks collapsed. Dust had coated his esophagus and ripped his stomach lining, causing severe hemorrhaging. Being realistic, he was probably hours away from dying. Luckily, his support team was there to help him. They helped him get off his ass and get back to running the race, baby! Meanwhile, oh shit, look who decided to wake up, it's Felix! Also, apparently along the road, Felix managed to get water from a water tower somehow? I don't know how the fuck he pulled that off, whatever. All things considered, Felix kind of has an advantage now. He's a few sips ahead of the rest of the pack. About 7 miles from the finish line, Thomas, who, remember, had severe hemorrhaging in his stomach lining, was begging his support team for water. But they had a better idea. They fed Thomas a mixture of egg whites and strychnine. Now, some of you might be asking, what is strychnine? Rat poison. They were making him eat rat poison. Apparently, in small doses, strychnine kind of works as a stimulant. So, really, they were just trying to get the pep back in his step, you know? Doing research for this part was so insane because, every source I found talked about Thomas eating this egg white strychnine mixture as doping or a performance enhancing drug. The sources, they're like, his team made him eat raw, unrefrigerated egg whites and rat poison as he was running the race. This was, of course, before the Olympics had established their anti-doping regulations. One of them, I swear to God, one of my sources said, a practice like this would not be allowed today. No shit! I get it because technically he was ingesting a substance while he was competing, but I really don't think this drug was enhancing his performance that much. Okay, let me rephrase that because yes, the strychnine was absolutely a performance enhancing drug. It was a stimulant. It did help him to keep running when he wouldn't be able to otherwise. I think the point I was trying to make is that if you wanted to point out one part of Thomas Hicks' performance that was unfairly enhanced, I would probably point my finger at the people who were physically picking him up and carrying him through the race. I think they unfairly enhanced his performance. Oh shit, remember Frederick? The guy who, way at the beginning, just gave up and hopped in one of the officials' cars? Well, after 11 miles of a car ride, with the finish line finally in sight, Frederick decided that he was feeling a lot better, and that he would be finishing this race. He jumped out of the car, despite officials screaming at him not to, and he ran the rest of the race. Frederick managed to cheat his way across the finish line at 3 hours, 13 minutes. And, oh my god, talk about a victory lap. The crowd was going crazy for him. He got personally congratulated by Alice Roosevelt, the president's daughter. He even got a wreath and a picture taken with her. In fact, she was about to give him the actual gold medal until spectators were like, wait a second, weren't you in a car? Weren't you, smiling and waving out the window of a car, 20 minutes ago? So yeah, Frederick got disqualified. Everyone's mad at him now. No more fun. He would later claim that he did this whole thing as a joke, that he wasn't actually trying to cheat the Olympics. It was just a prank, bro. You know, it's a classic Olympic prank, which always go over well. Anyway, a few minutes later, who stumbles up the track? It's Thomas! Your boy could hardly walk. He was hallucinating from the rat poison. He was being held up by his support team as he could hardly stand up on his own. Apparently, when someone pointed out that the finish line was like within reach, he got a bit of a second wind and started to kind of jog. Look, Thomas, there's the finish line. You're almost there. I can't make it. Please, I need something to eat. Of course, here, 2 more raw egg whites coming right up. No! Damn it, fuck! Charles Lucas, one of the race officials, wrote this about seeing Thomas. Over the last 2 miles of road, Hicks was running mechanically, like a well-oiled piece of machinery. His eyes were dull and lusterless. The ashen color of his face and skin had deepened. His arms appeared as weights tied down. He could scarcely lift his legs while his knees were almost stiff. Basically, Thomas was like actually dying in front of them. But with another dose of egg whites and also brandy for some reason, Thomas made it across the finish line. All sources say he didn't actually walk or run across the finish line. Bruh. He was basically being carried by his support team while his feet were kind of moving. He finished in 3 hours and 28 minutes. And thank God he immediately got medical attention. Thomas was in such a bad state that if he had gone even another hour without help, he would have died for sure. While running the race, like from the time he started to the end, Thomas had lost 8 pounds. The rest of our boys who hadn't perished or quit along the way continue to slowly trickle in. Hey, remember Felix, our beloved Cuban mailman? Despite having multiple snack breaks, climbing a water tower, and taking a nap, he still finished the marathon in 4th place. Coming in 9th place, presumably with a dog still hanging off his pant leg, was Len Tauniani, with his fellow South African Jan Mashiani coming in a little later and joining him in 13th place. In the end, of the 32 people who entered the race, only 14 of them completed it. That is the worst ever ratio of entrants to finishers in the history of the Olympic marathon. Additionally, this was also the slowest time of any marathon winner in Olympic history. This event was such an obvious, crushing, embarrassing failure that they almost struck the marathon from future Olympics altogether. Look, I mean, yeah, someone cheated, someone got poisoned, 2 of the contestants were literally exhibits in a human zoo. But at the end of the day, the only thing that really matters is that everyone tried their best, had fun, and stayed true to themselves. So that's the story of the 1904 Olympic Marathon, one of the biggest disasters in Olympic history. So far. I have been wanting to get back to my roots of silly, goofy Dapper histories for a while. I've been doing very long, very serious videos lately, and I just needed a bit of a palate cleanser. So as usual, thank you so much for watching. Subscribe if you want to, don't if you don't, and I will see you next whenever I upload. Bye! Just kidding! I have more to say. Remember Felix? Our peach-stealing, nap-taking Cuban mailman? Oh my god, like, he's the most interesting person in the world. I might have to do a whole Dapper history on this guy alone. After his performance in this nightmare marathon, he was given a sponsorship to run in a marathon in Athens in 1906, representing Cuba. He took the sponsorship, everything was good to go. The day of the marathon arrives, he's not there. Apparently, fucking no one could figure out where he was or what happened to him, and so he was declared dead. Like, they put an obituary for him in the paper. But then, 1 year later, in Havana, who should show up in a Spanish steamer? It's Felix! After a full fucking year of everyone thinking that he was dead, with no explanation to be given, he shows up and goes over to a friend's house for dinner. And his whereabouts for that whole year that he was missing remain a mystery to this day. I would have to do another Dapper history on him alone, because he's apparently one of the most interesting people in history. So yeah, anyway, back to the outro. Subscribe if you want to, don't if you don't. Thanks for watching, bye!
That's only you.